The call that changed everything. The galaxy was in turmoil. Systems were falling, planets were burning, and species that once held power across the stars were now struggling for survival. News of the Vorsk Dominion spread like wildfire. It wasn't just their military strength that made them dangerous. It was their overwhelming speed and ruthlessness. Entire fleets disappeared without a trace. Colonies were obliterated in the blink of an eye, and no one seemed capable of stopping them. As the destruction spread, the galaxy's leaders began to understand just how dire the situation was. The Vorsk were unlike any enemy the universe had ever faced. On the far edge of the galaxy, in a quiet corner of space, Earth had remained largely isolated from the galactic conflicts. The humans had been quiet for years, slowly rebuilding after the last Great War and focusing on their own technological advancements. But when the Galactic Council sent out a distress signal, asking for help, everything changed. It wasn't the first time the Council had asked for assistance, but this time it felt different. The message was desperate, full of fear. The Vorsk Dominion had started a campaign of conquest, and no matter how many fleets they threw at them, the enemy grew stronger. The message was clear. We need help, and we need it now. Humanity, if you are out there, please respond. The transmission echoed through the dark reaches of space. The call was sent, reaching the few human ships that were still active in space. Those who had abandoned the galaxy's wars now felt a stirring of unease. Could they afford to ignore the call of the galaxy? Or was this their chance to prove that they were more than the species that had once been feared and respected across the stars? The Council had been wary of humanity's involvement in galactic matters for years. After all, the humans had a history of doing things their own way. They weren't part of the Galactic Council, and many believed they were too unpredictable to be trusted. But the Vorsk Dominion had proved to be a much greater threat than anyone had anticipated. No one could ignore the devastation they were leaving behind. Meanwhile, on Earth, the news was delivered straight to the highest levels of government and military. The message was clear, and it left no room for doubt. The fate of the galaxy hung in the balance, and humanity had been called to action. The President of Earth stood in front of the Council of Generals and military leaders. They were all gathered in the war room, their faces grim, their eyes scanning the message. The room fell silent as they all considered the implications of the call. For years, humanity had been content to stay in the background, focusing on their own development. They had little interest in galactic politics and had been content with their technological progress. But now, a new threat had emerged, one that couldn't be ignored. "Are we really ready for this?" General McAllister asked, his voice heavy with skepticism. "We don't even know what we're up against." The President stared at the message again. "We have no choice. If we don't act now, there may not be a galaxy left to save. The Vorsk Dominion is wiping out everything in their path, and if they succeed, it could mean the end for all of us." "But we've been out of the fight for so long," said Admiral Jenkins. "We don't even know where we stand compared to the other fleets. What if we fail?" Another silence fell over the room. It was a question that haunted every officer and leader present. What if they failed? What if humanity, once feared for its power, was now too weak to make a difference? The President stood tall. "We won't fail," he said. "We can't. The galaxy needs us, and it's time we answered the call." The decision was made. Earth would send a fleet, not a small one, but a full-scale force prepared to fight the Vorsk Dominion. The human fleet would be their answer to the galaxy's prayers. It wouldn't be easy, but they had one advantage. Humanity had faced destruction before. They knew how to rebuild, and they knew how to fight. The moment the decision was made, every shipyard on Earth shifted into full production. Humanity was no longer the quiet, isolated species they had once been. They would take their place among the stars once more. Meanwhile, the Galactic Council watched, hopeful but anxious. Would humanity truly answer the call? The Vorsk had crushed every resistance they had encountered so far. The thought of humanity entering the fray was both a blessing and a curse. On the one hand, Earth was known for its fierce warriors and advanced technology. But on the other hand, the galaxy had long feared what would happen if humanity was ever truly united and focused. Their potential for both creation and destruction was unmatched. Back on Earth, the newly formed fleet began its journey toward the heart of the war. It was a massive operation, with hundreds of ships, soldiers, and engineers preparing for what would be the most dangerous mission humanity had ever undertaken. The Resolute, a warship that had been under construction for years, would lead the charge. It was the flagship, the symbol of humanity's return to the galactic stage. Captain Reagan Taylor stood on the bridge of the Resolute, staring out into the stars. She was ready for this moment. The pressure was immense. Humanity had been silent for so long, and now they were being called to fight, to prove that they still had what it took to stand among the greatest forces in the universe. As the ship made its way through the cosmos, Reagan knew that they were about to face a challenge unlike anything they had ever seen before. But as the fleet traveled deeper into enemy territory, something unexpected happened. The Vorsk Dominion, aware of humanity's movements, began to feel the weight of fear. For the first time, the invincible enemy began to question if they could truly defeat the humans. The question wasn't whether they could fight back. It was whether they could survive. The call had been made, and humanity was coming. The galaxy might have asked for help, but now they had to face the reality that humanity was not the same species they had once feared. The time for mercy was over, and the Vorsk Dominion would learn that soon enough. The human fleet, massive and filled with the hopes of an entire galaxy, moved slowly but steadily toward the heart of the war. As the ships crossed through the stars, the tension among the crew members was palpable. Each officer and soldier was aware of the enormity of their mission. Their presence in the galaxy was no longer a mere possibility. It was a certainty. Their task, to defeat the Vorsk Dominion, an enemy that had crushed everything in its path. The pressure was immense, yet there was something different about humanity's approach. Unlike the others, who had been caught off guard, humanity had seen destruction before and emerged stronger. This time, they had no choice but to win. Captain Reagan Taylor stood at the helm of the flagship, the Resolute, her mind filled with questions. What would the Vorsk be like in battle? How would humanity fare against an enemy who had swept across the galaxy with unimaginable speed and power? She knew the reports, of course. The Vorsk were merciless. But humanity was not a species that simply accepted defeat. They had survived wars, conflicts, and natural disasters. They had been tested time and again, and every time they had emerged victorious. This would be no different. The first signs of the Vorsk Dominion's presence were already being detected. Long-range sensors began to pick up strange signals, and the crew of the Resolute grew more alert with each passing moment. The enemy was close. "Captain, we've detected Vorsk ships on the outer rim of the system," Lieutenant Barlow announced, his voice steady but strained. "They're not in full formation, but they're gathering. Looks like they're preparing to engage." Reagan's heart skipped a beat. They were here. The time for waiting was over. The Resolute and the rest of the fleet adjusted their trajectory, closing in on the enemy. "All ships, prepare for battle," Reagan commanded. "We're going in." The ship's crew moved with precision, their training kicking in as they readied the weapons and shields. This wasn't just another battle. It was humanity's first step onto the galactic stage after years of isolation. Their fate, and the fate of countless others, was in their hands. And Reagan knew the stakes. If they failed here, if they allowed the Vorsk to crush them, then the galaxy would be lost forever. As the fleet moved forward, there was a strange sense of calm among the human soldiers. They knew the odds were stacked against them. They knew that many of them would not return. Yet they didn't fear death. They had faced it before. They had been driven to the edge and back, and somehow they had always managed to pull through. It was this resilience, this refusal to be broken, that made them different. The Vorsk might have been terrifying, but humanity had a secret weapon: their will to fight. The Vorsk ships soon came into view. There were dozens of them, sleek and black, their shapes menacing against the backdrop of space. Their weapons were powerful, capable of obliterating entire fleets with a single shot. The humans could see the enemy ships on their monitors, their silhouettes like shadows in the distance. There was no turning back now. This would be their first test. The crew braced themselves as the ships drew closer, their weapons primed and ready. "Captain, incoming fire," yelled Lieutenant Barlow as a burst of energy shot from one of the Vorsk ships, narrowly missing the Resolute. The battle had begun. Reagan quickly ordered evasive maneuvers as the crew of the Resolute worked together, dodging the Vorsk fire while returning with their own. The human ships fired in unison, their weapons tearing through the vastness of space, striking the Vorsk ships with deadly precision. But the Vorsk were not easily defeated. Their ships retaliated fiercely, their weapons blasting away at the human fleet, destroying smaller vessels in mere seconds. The humans were outnumbered, but they weren't outmatched. "Brace for impact," Reagan shouted as another blast rocked the Resolute. The ship shuddered, but it held together. The crew fought back, launching counterattacks, but they were aware that they couldn't keep this up forever. They needed to end this quickly, or they would lose everything. The Resolute's shield generators flared to life as the ship absorbed more fire from the Vorsk ships. Reagan's mind raced. She knew the Vorsk were powerful, but there was something else. They weren't just using brute force. They were using tactics, playing mind games with the humans, trying to break their spirit. They were testing their resolve. And the humans were passing with flying colors. "Captain, we're losing ships." Admiral Jensen's voice crackled through the comms. "The Vorsk are relentless. We can't keep up much longer." Reagan's heart sank, but she refused to show any sign of fear. "We won't give up," she said, her voice steady despite the chaos around her. "Hold the line. Reinforcements are coming." She knew that help was on the way. Human ships, including the Titan and the Defiant, were racing to join the battle. But the Vorsk were pushing hard, and they were not about to give up easily. Their ships continued to fire, their deadly weapons threatening to overwhelm the human forces. But then something unexpected happened. The Vorsk fleet, after taking heavy losses, began to retreat. The human fleet had held their ground longer than anyone expected. The Vorsk ships turned, their dark forms fading into the void as they pulled back into deep space. The humans had won this first round. But Reagan knew this was just the beginning. The Vorsk had retreated for now, but they would be back. And next time, they would come with even more force. The humans had proven themselves capable of fighting back, but they had yet to see the full extent of the Vorsk threat. The human fleet gathered its ships together, taking a moment to regroup. The battle had been fierce, but the message had been clear. Humanity was not going to go down without a fight. And the Vorsk were beginning to realize that maybe, just maybe, they had underestimated the humans. Reagan stood on the bridge, looking out at the stars. The fleet had won its first battle, but the war was far from over. The Vorsk would return, and the humans would be ready. This was just the beginning. The galaxy had called, and humanity had answered. Now, the Vorsk would have to learn the hard way. Never underestimate the power of humanity. The following days after the battle were a mixture of relief and preparation. While the human fleet had won a significant victory, they had also sustained heavy losses. The war had only just begun, and Reagan knew that what they had seen so far was only the tip of the iceberg. The Vorsk had retreated for now, but they would return with even more devastating force. There was no doubt about that. The Resolute and the other ships of the human fleet limped back to the nearest human-controlled station, the Phoenix Outpost, a massive space station designed to repair and resupply fleets between battles. It was a welcome sight after the harrowing encounter with the Vorsk. The outpost was bustling with activity as engineers, doctors, and crew members worked around the clock to tend to the wounded, repair damaged ships, and restock the fleet. Reagan stood at the command center, her eyes fixed on the holographic display in front of her. It showed the status of the fleet. The Resolute was still operational, but several other ships were too damaged to continue fighting without extensive repairs. The Titan and Defiant had fared better, but the losses they had suffered were still significant. "Captain," Lieutenant Barlow said, stepping up beside her, "we've received a message from Admiral Jensen. He wants us to prepare for a briefing in an hour. It's about the next phase of the campaign." Reagan nodded but said nothing. She had a feeling she knew what it would be about. They couldn't rest for long. The Vorsk were going to come back, and when they did, it would be with everything they had. She needed to make sure her crew was ready. As Reagan walked through the halls of the Resolute, she saw the faces of her crew, some battered and weary, others eager for more action. It was clear that the first victory had ignited something inside them. There was a fire in their eyes, a hunger for revenge, for justice. They had proven themselves on the battlefield, and they were ready for whatever the Vorsk could throw at them next. The humans were united, and that unity would be their greatest strength. The briefing room was filled with officers and senior crew members when Reagan arrived. Admiral Jensen, standing at the head of the table, wasted no time in getting to the point. "We've received word from several other human colonies and factions," he said. "The Vorsk are preparing for another strike. This time, we believe they'll target our core systems, the ones closest to Earth itself." The room went silent. The core systems were the heart of humanity's civilization. If the Vorsk managed to destroy those systems, it would cripple human power across the galaxy. Reagan's stomach tightened at the thought of such an outcome. The Vorsk could not be allowed to succeed. Jensen continued, "Our fleets will be divided. We'll send a portion to protect the core systems, while the rest of us will stay here and prepare for another confrontation with the Vorsk. This is our chance to truly cripple their forces and show them that they're not as unstoppable as they think." The humans had learned from their first engagement with the Vorsk, and they had learned quickly. They knew that the Vorsk might have superior firepower, but humanity had something the Vorsk didn't: strategy, adaptability, and a willingness to fight until the last breath. Reagan felt a renewed sense of purpose. She had seen her crew fight with everything they had in the first battle, and now it was time for the second phase. The Vorsk may have underestimated them before, but they wouldn't make that mistake again. "We'll do whatever it takes to protect the core systems," Reagan said, her voice steady. "We've shown them that we can fight back. Now, we need to make sure they understand that we're not afraid. We'll strike them before they can strike us." The meeting continued with discussions of tactics and strategies. Everyone knew the stakes were high. It wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about making a stand. If humanity was going to survive this war, it had to take the fight to the Vorsk, and it had to do so now. In the days that followed, the fleet began its preparations. The humans didn't have the luxury of time. The Vorsk could strike at any moment, and the human fleet had to be ready. Every ship was being reinforced and upgraded with the latest technology. Every officer was sharpening their tactics, and every soldier was preparing for the battle of their lives. Reagan found herself at the helm of the Resolute once again, this time preparing for what would likely be their biggest confrontation yet. The fear she had felt earlier was gone. What remained was determination. Her crew was ready, and they had something the Vorsk would never have: the unbreakable will to survive. The day of the battle arrived sooner than expected. The Vorsk had launched their attack on the core systems. It was a full-scale assault, a fight for the heart of humanity's territory. The fleet was moving fast, trying to intercept the Vorsk before they could inflict any real damage. "We're going in hot," Lieutenant Barlow said as the Resolute shook under the weight of its acceleration. "Brace for impact." Reagan gripped the armrest of her chair as the ship tore through space. The enemy was closing in fast. This would be the battle that defined humanity's place in the galaxy. Would they rise to the challenge, or would they fall beneath the might of the Vorsk? As they neared the battlefield, the sight before them was overwhelming. The Vorsk ships were in formation, their dark shapes forming a menacing wall across space. The human fleet arrived just in time to stop them from reaching the core systems. The battle began almost instantly, with a barrage of fire exchanged between the two fleets. Reagan knew that this would be a test of everything they had learned. But there was one thing the Vorsk didn't know. Humans never gave up. And if the Vorsk thought they could win, they were about to learn a painful lesson. The humans would show the galaxy what they were capable of, and the Vorsk would learn that underestimating humanity was the last mistake they would ever make. The battle raged on, and the vastness of space seemed to warp and twist under the chaos. The Vorsk Dominion, with its formidable firepower and overwhelming numbers, sought to push through humanity's defenses. But the humans, though fewer in number, were relentless. They fought with a determination that the Vorsk could not comprehend. Reagan stood at the helm of the Resolute, her hands steady on the controls as her crew worked in unison, coordinating their attacks. Every shot fired, every maneuver executed, was a carefully planned effort to gain an advantage. But the Vorsk were a cunning foe, their ships responding with terrifying speed and deadly precision. The battlefield was a swirling vortex of energy blasts, explosions, and the eerie silence of space, punctuated only by the occasional comms burst from the ships. "Captain, we're taking heavy fire," Lieutenant Barlow shouted as the Resolute rocked from a direct hit. The ship's shields flared brightly before stabilizing, but the impact had rattled the crew. "We can't keep taking hits like this," Barlow continued, his voice tinged with urgency. Reagan took a deep breath and nodded. "We won't. Get the auxiliary power to the shields. I want full defensive capacity. We need to hold them back." Despite the damage, the Resolute held steady. The crew worked quickly, and within moments, the shield systems were reinforced, giving the ship a much-needed buffer against the Vorsk's relentless attacks. The human fleet had suffered losses. Several ships were already drifting in space, their hulks burning with the remnants of their final stand. But they were not retreating. They were holding their ground. From the corner of her eye, Reagan saw the Titan and the defiant maneuvering to flank the Vorsk forces. The human strategy was becoming clear: divide the Vorsk's attention and keep them on the defensive. The Vorsk, for all their strength, were beginning to feel the pressure. They had underestimated humanity, and now they were being forced to adjust their tactics on the fly. "Admiral Jensen to Captain Taylor," came the voice over the comms. "We've got a small opening in their formation. If we can push through, we can strike their command ship. Do you think your fleet can break through?" Reagan's heart raced. The Vorsk command ship was the key. If they could destroy it, the rest of the Vorsk fleet would be thrown into disarray, potentially giving humanity the advantage they so desperately needed. "We're going to make a push," Reagan replied firmly. "But we need all ships ready to coordinate. No one hesitates. We break their line now, or we risk losing everything." The moment Reagan gave the order, the Resolute surged forward, its engines pushing the ship through the chaos of the battlefield. The human fleet followed in formation, weaving in and out of fire from the Vorsk. It was a dangerous maneuver, but the humans had no other choice. They had to take the fight to the Vorsk's heart. The tension in the bridge was unbearable as Reagan directed the ship through the maelstrom. The Vorsk command ship loomed ahead, a massive, imposing structure surrounded by smaller ships, each one a deadly weapon in its own right. It was heavily guarded, but the humans had no choice. They had to strike now or risk being overwhelmed by the full might of the Vorsk forces. As they closed in, the Vorsk ships tried to form a protective wall around their command ship, but the humans were quick, dodging and weaving to avoid fire, while retaliating with precise laser strikes. The Resolute unleashed a powerful volley of its own, hitting the smaller Vorsk ships and causing several of them to explode in brilliant flashes of light. "Captain, we're clear of their defensive ships," Barlow yelled. "We've got a clean shot at the command ship." Reagan's heart pounded in her chest. This was it, the moment that could change the entire course of the battle. She didn't hesitate. All weapons to full power. Target their engines. We take out their propulsion, and the rest of their fleet will fall apart. The crew worked in unison. The Resolute's weapon systems locked onto the Vorsk command ship. The massive ship loomed ahead, its shields flickering as it tried to respond. But humanity's ships were relentless, each shot finding its mark. The Resolute fired, a direct hit to the command ship's engines. A brilliant explosion rippled through the space around it. "Direct hit," shouted Barlow. "The Vorsk command ship is crippled. Their fleet is disorganized." The Vorsk forces, thrown into disarray by the loss of their command ship, began to falter. Without the central coordination, they lacked the precision they had shown earlier in the battle. Some ships continued to fight, but many began to retreat, realizing that their key advantage had been stripped away. Reagan's lips curled into a grim smile. They had done it. The tide of the battle had shifted, but the fight wasn't over yet. As the Vorsk fleet scattered, Reagan knew that this victory wasn't final. The Vorsk were an empire built on conquest, and they wouldn't go down without one last attempt to retaliate. "Admiral Jensen, we've crippled their command ship. The fleet is disorganized. We've got them on the ropes," Reagan said, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. "But we need to move fast before they regroup. We'll follow them into their retreat. We can't let them lick their wounds." "Understood, Captain," Jensen replied. "All ships, follow the Resolute. No mercy." The battle wasn't over, but the humans had shown something crucial. The Vorsk were not invincible. They were dangerous, yes, but they could be defeated. And humanity had just proven that. As the Resolute led the charge into the Vorsk's retreat, Reagan knew they had taken a giant leap forward in this war. The galaxy had seen what humanity was capable of, and the Vorsk had learned the hard way not to underestimate them. But in the back of her mind, Reagan also knew that the Vorsk would not forget this defeat. They would be back, and next time, they would come with everything they had. But humanity would be ready. The battle for the galaxy was far from over. As the aftermath of the battle settled in, the human fleet began to regroup, their victory over the Vorsk still fresh in their minds. The Resolute remained the heart of the fleet, its crew exhausted but victorious. The once overwhelming threat of the Vorsk had been struck a decisive blow, but Reagan knew better than to think this war was over. The Vorsk had been thrown into disarray, but they were not a species that easily gave up. This was merely a temporary setback for them. In the days that followed, Reagan and her crew worked tirelessly to repair the Resolute and tend to the wounded. The damage they had sustained during the battle was significant, and while they had come out on top, the toll was evident. Many of their ships had been severely damaged or destroyed, and the survivors mourned the loss of their fallen comrades. But even in their sorrow, there was determination. The humans had proven that they could fight back, and they had taken down one of the most powerful factions in the galaxy. The crew of the Resolute wasn't about to stop now. They had shown the Vorsk that they could bleed, but more importantly, they had shown them that they could rise again. And that was something the Vorsk had not counted on. Reagan stood at the observation deck, watching as the remnants of the fleet floated in space. The stars glowed quietly in the distance, and for a moment, it almost felt peaceful. But she knew that peace was temporary. The Vorsk would return, and when they did, they would come for revenge. It wasn't over yet. "Captain," came the voice of Lieutenant Barlow over the comms. "We've received a new transmission. It's from the Alliance. They've detected an anomaly near the Vorsk homeworld. Something big is coming." Reagan's brow furrowed. The Alliance was one of the few factions humanity had managed to form an alliance with, and if they were noticing something unusual, it couldn't be good. "What kind of anomaly?" she asked. "It's too big to be a standard fleet," Barlow replied, sounding uneasy. "It's unlike anything we've ever seen before. We think it's a new weapon, something the Vorsk have been working on in secret." Reagan's mind raced. If the Vorsk were building a new weapon, it was likely something that could turn the tide of the war in their favor. She couldn't allow that to happen. "Prepare the fleet," Reagan ordered, her voice steady despite the tension in her chest. "We're heading to the Vorsk homeworld. It's time to put an end to this once and for all." The Resolute and the remaining ships of the fleet began to make their way toward the Vorsk homeworld, their engines roaring to life as they set course for the heart of the enemy's territory. It was a risky move, but Reagan knew it was the only option. If the Vorsk were indeed working on a weapon of mass destruction, humanity had to stop it before it was too late. As they neared the Vorsk homeworld, the tension in the air was palpable. The fleet moved in tight formation, their weapons primed and ready. The vastness of space stretched out before them, and Reagan couldn't help but wonder what lay ahead. The Vorsk had shown their strength, and now they were about to show humanity theirs. The stakes had never been higher. "We're entering Vorsk space," Barlow reported. "Scanners are picking up massive energy signatures. This is it, Captain. Whatever they've built, it's here." Reagan gripped the armrest of her chair tightly. She could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on her. This was a turning point in the war. If they could destroy whatever weapon the Vorsk had created, they might finally have a chance to bring an end to this conflict. If they failed, humanity's survival would be in jeopardy. "All ships, prepare for battle," Reagan commanded. "We'll take out their weapon and make sure they know that no one can threaten humanity and get away with it." As they approached the Vorsk homeworld, Reagan's heart raced. The enemy had been preparing for this moment, just as humanity had. And now, the final showdown was about to begin. The Vorsk were about to learn just how much humanity was willing to fight for their survival. The human fleet dropped out of hyperspace, the vast expanse of the Vorsk homeworld now visible in the distance. In the blackness of space, a massive, ominous structure loomed on the surface of the planet. It was unlike any ship or station Reagan had ever seen. Its sheer size was beyond comprehension. It appeared to be a massive weapon, something designed for complete and utter destruction. "That's it," Barlow whispered in awe. "That's the weapon." The Vorsk had truly built something terrifying. The structure radiated with immense power, its energy fields crackling like a storm. It was clear that this weapon was not only capable of wiping out entire fleets, it could obliterate entire planets. "Captain, we've got company," Lieutenant Barlow said, his voice tense. Reagan snapped her attention back to the screen. Dozens of Vorsk warships were descending from the planet's surface, moving to intercept the human fleet. They were prepared for this, and they would fight to defend their weapon at all costs. "Braced for impact," Reagan ordered, her voice calm despite the storm of activity around her. "We're not backing down." The battle began in earnest, the Vorsk warships charging forward, weapons blazing. The human fleet responded with equal ferocity, firing lasers and missiles at the incoming ships. The sheer size of the Vorsk warships was overwhelming, but the humans fought with a grit and determination that their enemies could not match. Every shot, every maneuver was calculated to outsmart and outblast the enemy. The fight was brutal, and as the battle raged on, Reagan knew they had to destroy the weapon. It was their only chance to bring the war to a decisive end. The Vorsk had unleashed their greatest weapon, but they hadn't accounted for one thing: humanity's unyielding will to survive. Reagan's crew was giving everything they had, but time was running out. The weapon was too close to full power, and if they didn't strike soon, the entire galaxy would be at risk. "We're almost there," Reagan muttered, her fingers flying over the controls. "Prepare for final assault." This was it, the final chance to strike the blow that would end the war. The future of humanity rested on their ability to defeat the Vorsk weapon and survive the fight. And Reagan knew one thing for certain: no matter what happened, humanity would give everything they had to ensure they came out on top. The battle raged on around the Resolute, each passing second feeling like a lifetime. The crew was exhausted, but their resolve remained unbroken. Reagan stood in the command center, her eyes fixed on the screen, watching as the human fleet clashed with the Vorsk warships. The Vorsk, while large and imposing, were not prepared for the sheer tenacity and strategy of the human forces. Each maneuver, Each tactical decision was made with precision, a testament to the human spirit of survival and defiance. Reagan could feel the weight of responsibility pressing down on her shoulders. She knew that the key to ending the war lay in taking out the Vorsk's weapon, but getting to it would not be easy. The Vorsk had positioned their fleet around the weapon like a shield, and breaking through would require everything the human fleet had. "Captain, we've sustained heavy damage," Lieutenant Barlow reported, his voice strained. "Several ships in our squadron are losing power. We can't keep this up much longer." Reagan's heart skipped a beat as she glanced at the damage reports. The fleet was taking a beating, but they couldn't afford to stop now. The weapon was almost fully charged, and if they didn't destroy it soon, the entire galaxy would be in peril. Every minute they delayed brought the Vorsk closer to unleashing their destructive force. "We can't stop now," Reagan said, her voice firm despite the pressure. "Push forward. We're not backing down." The human fleet pressed on, charging forward through the hail of enemy fire. Reagan's mind was racing, calculating the best approach to get to the weapon. The Vorsk had concentrated their forces around the massive structure, but there had to be a weakness. There always was. "Captain, we've detected a weak spot in the Vorsk defense perimeter," Lieutenant Barlow said, his voice filled with urgency. "It's on the far side of the weapon. We can't take it out head-on, but if we can slip through their lines, we might be able to plant a direct hit." Reagan's eyes narrowed. This was their chance. "Make the necessary calculations and get us in position," she ordered. "We've only got one shot at this." The crew worked quickly, rerouting power and recalibrating the ship's weapons for a direct assault. The Resolute turned sharply, dodging incoming fire as it accelerated toward the Vorsk weapon. Behind them, the rest of the fleet engaged the enemy, providing the necessary distraction to allow Reagan and her crew to get close. Reagan's grip tightened on the armrest of her seat as the Resolute moved closer to the enemy lines. The air in the command center was thick with tension. Every crew member was working at peak performance, knowing that failure was not an option. They had to succeed. They had to take down the weapon. "Target acquired," Barlow announced. "We're in range, preparing for final strike." Reagan nodded, her eyes fixed on the screen. The weapon loomed large ahead, its energy fields flickering and crackling. Time was running out. She could feel the thrum of the ship's engines as they prepared for the final push. The Vorsk fleet around the weapon opened fire, but the Resolute was ready. The shields absorbed the incoming blasts, and the crew's focus remained unwavering. They were close now, so close. "Fire," Reagan commanded. The ship's weapons unleashed a barrage of energy, each shot aimed with deadly accuracy at the weak point in the Vorsk defense. The Resolute shuddered as the weapons fired, and for a brief moment, everything seemed to slow down. The flashes of light from the enemy ships and the bright beams of energy from their own cannons filled the screen. It was the kind of chaos that could break a lesser crew, but not this one. The first few shots missed, but then the Resolute hit its mark. The weapon's shields flickered, then collapsed entirely, leaving it vulnerable. With a second, more powerful volley, the Resolute struck directly at the heart of the weapon. A massive explosion rippled through the space around them, and for a moment, it seemed like the entire galaxy had gone quiet. The Vorsk weapon began to disintegrate, its power source overloaded and erupting in a burst of energy that sent shockwaves through the surrounding ships. The enemy fleet seemed to freeze, their massive ships faltering in their attempts to regroup. Reagan held her breath as the weapon slowly crumbled, the Vorsk warships now scattered and disoriented. The victory was within reach, but Reagan knew they couldn't rest just yet. There were still Vorsk ships out there, and the battle wasn't over until they were completely neutralized. "All ships, focus fire on the remaining enemy vessels," Reagan ordered. "We need to finish this once and for all." As the human fleet pressed the advantage, the remaining Vorsk warships began to retreat, their commanders realizing that their greatest weapon had been destroyed. The Vorsk, for the first time, understood that humanity was not a force to be underestimated. The battle continued for hours, But with the weapon destroyed, the Vorsk had lost their greatest strength. One by one, their ships were either destroyed or forced to retreat. The human fleet, though battered and bruised, had emerged victorious. As the final Vorsk ship fled into the distance, Reagan allowed herself a brief moment of relief. The galaxy had been saved, but the cost had been high. The fleet had lost many ships, and many brave souls had given their lives. Reagan's heart was heavy with the knowledge that war had a price, but the victory was undeniable. Humanity had fought back against impossible odds and emerged triumphant. "Captain, we did it," Barlow said, his voice full of awe. Reagan nodded, her eyes scanning the battlefield. "We did it, but this war is far from over." The battle had been won, but the war was far from finished. The Vorsk would regroup, and they would come again. But now, the universe knew that humanity could not be broken. The galaxy had seen what humans were capable of, and no one would forget it. The fight was just beginning, but humanity had proven that when they answered the call, the galaxy would tremble. The stars ahead of them seemed to stretch into infinity, but for Reagan and her crew, it felt as though the journey was far from over. As the fleet regrouped and set course back toward Earth, the sense of relief was palpable, but so too was a deep, unsettling sense of dread. They had won the battle. The Vorsk had been defeated, for now, but Reagan knew this victory had come at a terrible cost. Many lives had been lost in the struggle. The human fleet was shattered, with a number of ships either heavily damaged or lost completely. Yet, despite the heavy toll, humanity had proven something the galaxy had long forgotten, that they were a force to be reckoned with, capable of unimaginable resilience and strength when the stakes were highest. But as Reagan sat in the quiet of her command chair, staring out into the blackness of space, she knew this war wasn't over. No, the true test was only just beginning. "Captain," Lieutenant Barlow's voice broke through her thoughts. His tone was serious. "We've just intercepted a message from the Vorsk fleet. It's not a surrender, it's a declaration of war." Reagan's heart sank. She had expected this, but hearing the confirmation made it all the more real. The Vorsk would never truly accept defeat. They were a species built on domination. And now, humiliated and scarred by the destruction of their greatest weapon, they would return with a vengeance. "Prepare the fleet," Reagan ordered quietly. "Set course for Earth, but we'll need to be ready for whatever comes next." The crew moved quickly, and the human fleet adjusted its formation. It was clear that humanity was no longer just defending its home. It was now on the front lines of a much larger conflict, a conflict that would spread across the galaxy, challenging every alliance, every empire, and every life form that had come to believe the Vorsk would reign supreme. But the universe had seen humanity's power and grit, and no one was going to forget the message they had sent. "Captain," Barlow continued, "there's something else. It's a communication from the Galactic Council." Reagan raised an eyebrow. The Galactic Council, the very same body that had once dismissed humanity as insignificant, was now reaching out. She gave a short nod for Barlow to continue. "The Council wants to meet. They've realized the magnitude of the situation, and they're extending an offer of alliance," he said, his voice filled with disbelief. Reagan leaned back in her chair, taking a deep breath. The Council had made their decision to turn their backs on humanity once before. They had underestimated the human will to survive, to fight, and to protect. Now, after seeing the destruction humanity had unleashed, they wanted to join forces. "I don't trust them," Reagan said flatly. "We've been on our own for far too long to believe anything they say." Barlow nodded, but didn't argue. They had both seen how the Council had dismissed humanity, refused to lend support when it was needed the most. Now, they were coming to them for help. It felt too much like a last-ditch effort to save their own skins. "We'll respond, but on our terms," Reagan continued. "We're not here to play their game. Humanity doesn't beg for help, but we'll take the necessary steps to protect ourselves and this galaxy." As the days passed, The fleet made its way toward Earth, but Reagan knew that the Council's offer would not be the end of the story. The Vorsk would return, and the universe would be forced to reckon with humanity's rise. Reagan stood before the view screen in the command center, watching as Earth slowly grew larger in the distance. It was home, the place they had fought to protect, and now it would be the stage for humanity's next move. The Council's message loomed large, but Reagan's instincts told her they couldn't afford to trust them. They had seen the galaxy through human eyes, unfiltered, raw, and driven by a single purpose: survival. "We're not like them," Reagan muttered under her breath. "We don't beg. We don't follow. We lead." The human fleet began its final approach, and Reagan knew they would be ready for whatever came next. The Vorsk would come back, and this time, humanity wouldn't just be defending their world. They would be setting the terms. As Earth came into full view, Reagan made a silent promise to her crew, to all the brave souls who had given everything for this fight. Humanity had answered the call, and they wouldn't stop now. No matter what the galaxy threw at them, they would stand firm. The universe had shuddered in fear when humanity showed up, but it hadn't seen anything yet. The true war was just beginning.